In today's episode, you will learn how to add CRUD functionality to your database application. In the previous episode, we created an application where we connected to a MySQL database and let users insert data into it. Today, we'll be expanding on that application, where we'll be adding read, update, and delete, the remaining three of CRUD. But before the video starts, please leave a like and subscribe, as it will help me out very much, and it'll also promote this video to other soon-to-be senior engineers just like yourself. Anyways, without further ado, let's just get into the video. So quickly, before we get started on creating all these extra cool functionalities, I just want to quickly go over and demo what we created in the previous episode. So this is the form that we created. We can enter a first name like Kian, a last name of let's say Smith, and then Kian@example.com. Submit. We get a nice little message saying that we successfully inserted the form data. And back in our PHP MyAdmin, if I refresh, we have Kian Smith again. Now I say again is because I tried this out off camera, making sure it worked. But here it is again. Perfect. So let's go into the code and let's work on the R of CRUD, which is the read the data. So the way I want to display it is I want to display it as a table. It will be below our input form where we'll see all of the data. It will be pretty much mimicking what we have in a PHP MyAdmin table. So we go back here, we have ID, first name, last name, and email. So all of this stuff I pretty much want to show in our PHP application, right around here. So let's quickly sketch that out. I'll create a table instead of my table tags. Then I'll first have to create the header row, which will be the headings for each of the columns. So I'll create a row and I'll add our th tags. So as I said, I wanted the ID, I wanted the first name, I wanted the last name, and I wanted the email. So if I go back into the app, this is what it looks like. So let's quickly add some mock data. So tbody, a row, td, with an ID of 1, name of test, last name of test last, and then the email of test@example.com. Refresh. This is how our table looks like. To make it a bit easier to see, I'll quickly add, not a body, a border of 1, which will give a tiny little border around our table. Now, the styling isn't the most important part here. We just want to make it work. We can style everything later. So following this, let's get to actually getting the data from our database and displaying it like this. So we'll head on over to our database file where we create a connection to our database, we connect to the database, and we have a function to insert the form data, as you remember if you watched the previous episode. So I'll create a new function, public function get all data, which will get all the data. You probably got that from the name. So same structure. We'll create an SQL query where we'll run the query of select star from form inputs, which is the table name. So what does this statement mean? Well, SQL has this thing to it where it's really easy to read. Select, we're selecting something. Star indicates everything. From, and then form inputs. So we're getting all the data from our table. Then we create a statement. This con prepare, where we pass in our query. And then finally, we have to execute this query, like we have done above here. But you see here, we return on the execution. But if we hover over execute, it returns true on success and false on failure. But we want to return the data. So how would we do that? Well, let me show you. First, we need to still execute our query, but we're not going to return it, nor are we passing any parameters, as we don't need any parameters like we've got here. Now, what we want to return belongs as a method inside of statement. So I'm going to return statement fetch all, which is the method that fetches all. And as you can see here, we can add a mode. And the mode we're going to be adding is PDO fetch assoc. Now what this does is this mode pretty much tells the PDO how to format the rows returned from the database. So what it does is it makes fetchal return each row as an associated array, where the key is the column name and the value is the column value. Simple as that. So with that, we can very easily show this. Now inside of our index.php, you can see we do not get a database connection. So I'll do that at the top of this file. Require once database.php. Then we'll create a new variable which will store our database connection. Then I'm going to create a new variable which will be result, which will be the result of our db get all data. Now what I want to do is I want to var dump this variable. Now var dump is a method that's built into PHP which pretty much dumps the information about the variable. I mean, you can read the description here. So with that, we can easily log our result and see what gets displayed. So if I refresh, we get all of this, which if you have a look, you start seeing stuff like this. Last name, string, Johnny. Email, string, mike@gmail.com. You start noticing that this is just data that is similar to what we have in our database. Now what we can do is we can add these little pre-tags that surround the var dump, which will then display the data in a nicer format. Now this is way more readable. As you can see, we have an array. The first element is an array with an ID that is an integer of 1, first name, which is a string, Mark, last name, which is a string of Williams, email, which is a string of mark@gmail.com. If we go back, that is our first row entry. And all of this seems to add up to our database. Now with this information, we know that we can easily loop over this array that we get returned from inside of our result variable and print each individual row. So we'll go back to our table body and I'll get rid of this mock data. And what I can do is use PHP tags inside of our HTML. So I open up a PHP tag and I'll write something like this. For each result as a row, because what for each does, it will loop over every element inside result. And as you can see, our result is an array that holds arrays. So what we get back is our row, which is another array, which holds our key value pairs. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this special thing inside of PHP. Now what this syntax here does is it pretty much lets us write HTML code in between these PHP tags or inside of this PHP for each, and it'll act like as if we're echoing data out. Yes, of course we can use an echo, but we can also use something like this. Pretty much, I can write something like h1, hello, and if I go back, you can see hello's printed multiple times. To be exact, it will be 8 times. I know it says 7 here, it's because we start at index of 0. So it'll be 7 plus 1. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Perfect. And we didn't use a single echo. That's just quite a cool tip for easier writing code, because most IDEs support this and let you get syntax highlighting for HTML, which is something you can't get when you use an echo. Anyways, let's get to displaying these rows. So we'll create a row, and we'll create a TD tag. Inside this TD tag, it will display the information. Now here's another cool thing we can do with PHP. Of course, we could do a PHP echo, and then we could do row ID and end the PHP tag. But a nice neat way of echoing data out quickly is by using this shorthand, where we put an equal sign instead of the characters PHP. This will work exactly the same as if we had an echo. So every time you want to echo out a piece of data inside of PHP tags, you can do this shorthand, which saves a couple characters and just looks much cleaner. Now, another thing we need to add to this is, if you remember from our previous episodes in the course, is that we need to sanitize this data. And for that, we use the function HTML special chars. And we'll put that, the ID that we get from our row inside of that. Then it's just straightforward. We just copy and paste this 3 more times, replace ID with, let's go back and actually check. First name with no spaces, last name and email. So we have first name, last name, and email. And if I reload, I'll probably get rid of this var dump as well. Reload. Our table is now filled with all of our data from our database. This means we have successfully been able to read the data from our table and display it. So now I'm going to add the functionality to delete, but I'm not going to delete everything. I want to be able to click a button, let's say around here, for each one of these rows where it will delete the specific row. Let's do that. First, let's add the button. Now that's as simple as adding another entry into our table where I'll put delete. For refresh, and now we have an extra column here. Obviously it doesn't have a heading, but we have delete here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to surround this inside of an A tag, or an anchor tag, as this is proper name. What this will do is it will turn this delete from text into a hyperlink. If we add a href, now I'm just going to put a hashtag. I don't want it to go anywhere. So if I reload, now we can click on each one of these. Obviously it won't do anything, but it's there. Now what I want is that when you click the delete next to a specific row, like let's say this one, 5, when you click delete, it will send you to another page or a script where it will delete the row with the ID of 5. So how do we get this ID of 5 to our delete button, and that then gets sent to our script? URL parameters. In PHP, we are able to retrieve data that's inside of URL parameters by using the get superglobal. So let me show how that works. First, I'm going to change this from a hashtag to actually something functional. So this script will be called script/delete row.php, but then we append the query $ID is equal to. Now, if we look above, we get the ID from our row. So we can just simply put that in here. We'll open up these PHP tags, but I'll use this shorthand for echoing, and I'll get the row that has our ID. And then of course, close the PHP tags. Perfect. Now if I refresh and click on one of these buttons, as you can see, it takes us to script delete row.php with the ID of 9. Of course, we get a not found because this file doesn't exist yet. So let's create it. Now I created it inside of a script directory. So script, and inside of here, I'm going to add delete row.php. Open up the PHP tags, and let's get to writing some code. So if is set, we want to make sure it's set from our get, the ID, which is the query parameter we pass in. And then if it is true and it is set, we'll execute whatever's code is in here. So first we'll store the ID. ID is equal to get ID. Then we want to delete it. Very simple. So I'm going to put a tag here saying delete from database. Of course, we do not have this functionality just yet. We need to create it. So we can head back over to our database.php. Under our get all data, we'll create a new function, delete row by ID, where inside of our parameter, we can pass in an ID. Same old SQL. Then inside of our query, we're going to write delete from our form inputs table, where the ID is set to :ID. And if you remember from the first episode, :ID will mean that this is a parameter that we need to specify later on. So inside of our statement, we'll put this prepare. We'll prepare the statement, and then we'll execute with an array, or key value array. We'll change our ID to the ID we get from our parameter. Now I want to return here, because if you remember, execute returns true on success and false on failure. And I want to be able to tell the user that it was successfully deleted. So then, if we go back to our delete row script, we can now require once, go back, our database PHP file, we can create a new database connection, and then we create a new result variable, which is going to be the Boolean that is returned from delete row by ID, where we pass in the ID variable. Now we can simply check if the result, let's say it was false, we want to display an error. And if you remember, we did this with sessions. So I'll create a session at the top. And inside of here, I'm going to say session error is set to unable to delete user. And then we'll head back to location back1 index.php and then exit the script. Else, if it was true, we can copy over this code and then change from error to success. And then inside of here, we'll say successfully deleted user with ID of, and I'll just append it here, ID. Now, one thing you probably might have noticed is all of this happens if the ID is set. So what if someone accesses this file, because anyone can just type in the URL, just /script/delete row.php. But what if they didn't provide an ID? Then the script will just end here. We'll reach here in our code and nothing will happen. The user will just be stuck here. So I think an easier thing we can do is actually delete all of this and put the header location back to our index.php at the end of the file, as nothing else will be executed, so we don't need to exit the script early, just like that. Let's have a look if this functionality works. If I reload the page, nothing changes visually, but let's see if I click on ID of 9, Key and Smith. Delete, the row is gone, and we get a prompt saying successfully deleted user with ID of 9. Now let's go back to our PHP MyAdmin, refresh the data, and ID of 9 is gone. Let's do ID of 2. Successfully deleted user with ID of 2. Go back to our database, refresh, ID 2 is gone. This means our functionality is successful. Now we have successfully been able to delete users by their specific ID. So now from our CRUD, we've got our C to create, R to read, the D to destroy, but we're left with one more, U for update. So let's go and do that now. This one will take a little bit more effort. I'm going to have something similar like I have with my delete. We'll have another link next to it that will instead say edit. Reload. Here it is. Of course, we'll change the link as well. We don't want it to be delete row. We want it to be edit row. But wait, how will we be able to edit it if it's in a script? Because we usually have scripts that does the backend logic, where the user cannot enter any information. We need to display a view, a regular form that the user can input in and then submit. So how will we do that? Instead of a script, we'll just have edit row.php and we'll still keep the query of ID. Now inside of here, I'm going to say edit row.php, create the HTML template. We'll add a H1, say edit user with ID. Now at the moment ID doesn't exist. So at the top of the file, I will open up PHP tags and I'll say if is set. Actually, no, I don't want a user to go in here at all or access the document unless there is a specific ID provided in the URL. So I'm going to flip the logic. I'm going to say if empty get ID, we'll send the user back to our index.php and exit the script. But first, I also want to add a quick message. So create a session start, session error, invalid URL, request. Now we know we have an ID inside of our URL param. So we can store that here. ID is equal to get ID. Now this here will work. Great. So let's create a simple form. Form Actually, no. Let's copy this form, as it will be literally the exact same thing. Copy that. Paste it in here. And actually, we can delete these outer form tags. So our first name, last name, email, and a type of submit. Method of post and action, instead, we'll go to script / edit row.php. And again, I'll pass in another param, or URL param, which will again be the ID. We're just passing it down. So then, let's get on to creating this script. Now inside of our scripts folder, we can create an edit row.php. Open up the PHP tag. And again, we'll do an if is set get ID. Then we'll save the ID in a variable get ID. Whoops, need to throw around that in quotes. And it'll be very similar to our delete. So require once back our database file. DB equals new database. Result is equal to DB. Oh, we forgot to create the update functionality inside of our database. No problem. Let's head on over to our database file and create that now. So create a new function called update data, where we'll pass in ID, the first name, the last name, and the email. Then create our query, which will be quite a long query. So I might actually open this up inside of these double quote marks. So on a new line, so just to make it easier to see for you guys, we'll write the following: update, then form inputs. We'll set the first name to the first name, last name to last name, email to email, where the ID is the ID provided. Quite a long query here, but simply we're updating our table. We're setting the first name to the new first name, last name to the new last name, and email to the new email, where the ID is ID. Then again, we'll create a statement, which will be this: con prepare, then pass in our SQL here, and then we'll write return statement execute, where we'll pass in all of the parameters we pass into the function variable, into the function parameters as these key value pair values. So first name will be first name, last name will be our last name, email will be our email, and finally ID will be the ID. Perfect. And again, I'm returning on the execute so I can get a true or false depending on how the execution went. So back in edit row, we'll use IntelliSense. So control and space if you didn't know how to access that. And now we get update data. But wait a minute. How are we supposed to get this data? We have a get request for the ID, so we can pass the ID. No problem. But first name, last name, email, we need to pass that in as well. And as we submit this form with a post request, we need to check if there's a post. So here is correct, but we also need an if server request method was equal to post. Then we can put this inside of here. So make sure we have an ID. Now what we can do is we can also check if it's set as our ID. Just do this like this, so it'll be a little bit easy to see. And is set post first name, because if we go back to our form, we have our first name here, our last name, and the email. So first name and is set last name and is set post email. So if we have all of this, we can then execute everything down here. With that, we get our ID, we get our first name from our post, first name, last name from our post, last name, and finally email. Now, of course, as we allow the user to enter new details, we also still need to validate it. So all of this is fine, to be honest, except for email. We want to make sure that the user entered a valid email. So we head back over to our manage form. We see we have our email, which has a filter var on it here. So I'll copy this, head back over here, and paste it in. Pretty much we're saying, if the user does not enter a valid email, we'll send it back to the index.php file, which is now to a directory behind with this error message in the session, which also means we need to start the session. Now, another thing I noticed is we don't really do any error handling in case it is not set. So else, I'll copy this over here, as it is pretty much the same thing. We'll add the error message as invalid inputs. Done. Okay, thank you. Now then, inside of here, we can now finally enter the rest of the parameters. So we have our first name, then our last name, and then the email. Great. Now with our result, we can do our basic check. First, we'll check if our result is false, which means we weren't successful. We'll copy this over and we'll send back with an error message. But this time, I think we should send them back to the form instead of index.php. And I think we should do that for all of them. So here I'll say unable to update user. And instead we'll send it back to edit row.php. Same over here, edit row. And up here, edit row. Else, if it was successful, we'll send back a success message saying successfully edited user. And here we can go back to the index because the user doesn't need to go back to the edit form. Of course, you can make that happen if you want the user to be able to update it straight away in case they mess something up. But this is how I'm going to do it. Now, if we head back over to our edit row, you can see we don't have any error handling. So we'll copy this over from our index.php, which is this code over here. And I'll put that down here. Pretty much we're saying inside of our session, if we have an error key, we'll echo out wherever that error is, and then we'll delete the error because we don't need it anymore. Same with the success, obviously with a bit of different styling. Now let's have a look at how this looks like, because now everything should be working. Oh, actually, let's do one final send back in case the user did not, or in case this is not been a post request, we'll just send it back to our index.php. Anyways, let's go back and reload. If we click on edit on ID of 8, we get first name, last name, and email. Now, this works, but I don't like it. I want the values to be preoccupied. So how would we do that? Well, we could use our database to try find the user with ID. This will also add to our validation because we don't really check if the ID is correct. This query at the moment is executed even if the ID is wrong or doesn't exist. So first we can do something where we check if the ID is correct. And with that, we can get back the whole data and then fill in these here with the data that already exists. Like we said with ID 8, first name will be preoccupied with Kian, last name will be preoccupied with Smith, and the email will be preoccupied with Kian@example.com. So let's create that function. Back in our database file, we'll create one more function, public function find, where we'll just get an ID. So SQL select star from our form inputs table where the ID is an ID that we will specify. Statement is this con prepare the SQL, and then finally, and then statement execute SQL. Statement execute with our parameters. We have ID or colon ID, I should say, which will be the ID from our function parameter. And now, what do you return? Well, if you remember before, we did something like this, where this statement fetch. Oh, but as you can see right here, right above it, we have simple fetch, which will get just one. Again, PDO fetch assoc. Great. With that, let's go back to our edit row file. And now we can require once our database file, create a database connection, view database, and we'll get the result from db find ID. Now then, what happens if there is no data? The ID is invalid. What does it return? Well, if we look here, return the value of the function on succeed depends on the fetch type. In all cases, false is returned on failure, or if there are no more rows. So we're checking for false. So if our result is false, we can simply head back and say invalid ID. This now covers our security, making sure that the ID needs to be valid for the rest of the form to work. And we also get all of the user's data, or the row with the ID of the correct user, which means now we can preoccupy these fields down here. Value, we'll do the PHP echo shorthand. From our result, we'll get our first name, again, we'll do this. We'll get from our result last name, and finally, we'll get result email. Now, if we head back over here into our form, refresh, now all of our data shows up that we can now edit. So, Kian Smith, let's do Kian.Smith. He's changed his email. Submit, successfully edited user. We see Kian Smith has a new email now, Kian.Smith@example.com. If we head back over here and refresh in PHP MyAdmin, Kian.Smith@example.com. He's got a new email. Now what happens if we have an incorrect ID? ID of 9. Invalid ID. Great. Exactly how I want it to work. Now before the end of this episode, I noticed that my manageform.php, which is technically a script, as we're not displaying anything to a user here, it should be inside of my script. So I'm going to move that to script. I'm going to rename it to, what is it? Is this create? Let's do create row.php. And back at my index, I need to then change this here to script/create row. Now we can see we've got create, delete, and edit. And then for our read or view, it's all up here. And with that, you have now successfully created a full CRUD application. In this application, you are now able to create a user with a first name, last name, and email, retrieve all the users from the database table, and perform operations such as deleting and editing each specific one. With that, we have finished this episode. So I hope you enjoyed, and I hope you learned something new. If you have, please leave a like and subscribe if you want to see more videos like this. On that note, I'll see you guys in the next episode. Bye bye.